Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Texas is proud to partner with the Texas Tribune to provide free public events like the one you're about to see. These candid conversations are designed to promote public dialogue and civic engagement throughout the state.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Albert Carrizales. I'm the Assistant to the President and the Director for External Affairs here at the University of Texas at San Antonio. Welcome to the UTSA Downtown Campus. Collectively, this campus and our main campus, we provide higher education services to over 28,000 students. Not long ago, a couple months ago, UTSA was recognized by the Times Higher Education as one of 100 universities in the world under 50 years of age. We are 45 years old. So within that 45-year time frame, we have made significant progress in our quest for Tier 1. So I'm glad to see, I saw some of our UTSA students here. I'm glad that they are here. And speaking of youth, I'd like to call on the young, dynamic, I call him the Jedi Master of digital media. Many of you know him as the man with a mic, the man who can engage anyone in an exciting conversation on Texas politics and public policy. And watching him in action leaves you wanting to know more about a topic, and his style encourages you to participate and get involved. So please welcome the Editor-in-Chief and the CEO of Texas Tribune, Mr. Evan Smith.
Albert, as you were describing me, I thought, who's he talking about? I want to meet that person. Who is that? You buried the lead that it was me until the end, which was not very nice of you. To Albert Carrizales, my Texas Lyceum brother, to Dr. Ricardo Romo, who has been so generous and hospitable in welcoming us to this campus so many times, to Etta and to Tammy and to everybody else on the UTSA staff, thank you so much for hosting my colleagues and me from the Texas Tribune and this wonderful audience here with us today. I am indeed Evan Smith. I'm the Editor-in-Chief and CEO of the Texas Tribune, and we are always so pleased to travel out of Austin, the bubble, to the real Texas, to put on events with elected officials and to talk about the issues that matter to not just people in the lobby or people who are in the professional political class, but real Texans, people who are living out in the world and are affected by policies in both Austin and Washington. That is the purpose of our events and all the cities we travel to get a conversation going about the priorities of our communities and the priorities of our state. And so we're pleased to be here at UTSA today. We'll introduce Congressman Cuellar in a second and have, I know, a fascinating conversation about many things that we all care deeply about. Tribune events are sponsored by generous folks in our corporate and institutional community who believe, as we do, that a smarter Texas is a better Texas. They believe that this kind of a conversation informs and educates people. And so they support the mission of the Tribune and therefore support these events. For today's event, I want to acknowledge and thank our sponsors and ask that you join me in doing so as well. Blue Cross Blue Shield of Texas, Texas Mutual Insurance, AT&T, BP, Christus Health, and Texas A&M University. Would you please give them a generous round of applause? As I said, those sponsors support the mission of the Tribune. They don't affect the content of our program. They don't affect our choice of panelists or the questions asked, but they believe in the idea that we in this state can be more thoughtful and productive and engaged citizens. And membership in the Texas Tribune is one way that all of you can contribute to making Texas a better place, because this is a community-supported, citizen-supported organization, public media. And so if you're inclined to become a member of the Texas Tribune, there's literature available at this event. I would also encourage you to go to texastribune.org/join. We are going to turn 5 on November the 3rd of this year. And it has been our pleasure and honor for 5 years to make the public interest journalism community in this state bigger and better, and we intend to continue to do it. Please silence your phones if you do not intend to tweet this event. And judging by the demographics in the room, I would say half probably do intend to tweet it and half probably don't. So if you're in the half that does not intend to tweet this event, please turn your phones completely off. If you do want to tweet this event, turn them to silent. Use the hashtag TribLive. We are at Texas Tribune. He is at Rep. Cuellar. I'm at Evan A. Smith. And Albert, I believe you all are at UTSA, correct? So that's the opportunity you have to tweet this event. We'll visit for about 35 minutes or so, balance of time questions, and have you out of here on time at 1 o'clock. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our distinguished lunchtime guest, U.S. Congressman Henry Cuellar, Democrat of Laredo, who's represented the 28th Congressional District since 2005. He's seeking a 6th term in 2014. After running unopposed in the March Democratic primary, he faces 3 minor party opponents, but no Republican this November. I'm going to go out on a limb and congratulate you, Congressman, on your re-election. In the 113th Congress, he serves on the House Appropriations Committee and its all-important subcommittees on Homeland Security and State Foreign Operations and related matters. He previously served as Texas Secretary of State, appointed by Governor Rick Perry, and as a member of the Texas House of Representatives for 14 years. Born in Laredo, he has an undergraduate degree from Georgetown University, a master's degree from Texas A&M International, and both a PhD and a law degree from the University of Texas at Austin. Please join me in welcoming the Honorable Henry Cuellar. Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you very much,
Great
Evan.
to see you.
Thank you.
Good to see you, sir. Thanks for being here. So when we first asked you to do this event, I thought immigration, border security, homeland security, many things that are topics of great interest to you and to this community and to the state. But then we had to go and bomb Syria. And I feel obligated, given the fact that we're now engaged in what many people are calling a war, but is certainly a military action. I wanted to ask you about your perspective on this, because you're one of the members of the U.S. House of Representatives who may be called upon, and has been called upon, in fact, but may be called upon again, to formally say grace over actions that we take overseas on behalf of the national interest. The President gave a speech today to the UN General Assembly that sounded like it could have been given by George W. Bush or John McCain. In fact, it might have been too conservative for the John McCain we knew up until recently. This is obviously something that the President is very serious about, and I know a number of members of Congress are serious about it. I wonder how you feel about it.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's funny how things change. You know, the President ran on saying that he was going to end the wars. Both wars over 10 years cost us over $1 trillion, and we lost a lot of men and women. But then threats will come up, and certainly here's a threat, a very serious threat. What makes ISIS a very different type of terrorist group is one, the main thing is they got resources. When they took over parts of Iraq, they took over some of the areas where they had wells, petroleum, oil. So our estimates that they're selling that in the black market at a very discounted rate, but they're probably making $1 to $3 million a day. So that's over $1 billion. So they got money, they got resources. So it's a different type of threat that we're seeing. And it's one of those things that, it was interesting. The President called them just some months ago a JV team. And then months later, he's saying, hey, we got to add some money. We got to have, we have to go and go after them. So it's one of those type of threats that we have to take very seriously.
Do you think that if it had not been for the horrible beheadings of these journalists and the public dissemination of those videos, do you think that the country would be and the Congress would be as firmly behind? I mean, the polls have shown, at least the early polls, that something like 2/3 of the public is for some kind of action in Syria. Bipartisan support in Congress. There are some people on the very far left and some people on the very far right, interestingly, who've kind of come around and connected to oppose this. But most Democrats and most Republicans seem to be with him. Is your sense that the public is on board?
Yeah, the polls that we've seen, the people we've talked to show that the American public does support the bombing. And certainly the members of Congress, the ones I've talked to, both Democrats and Republicans, generally, they do support the precedent here on the bombing. Now, once you start talking about boots, then it's a different story.
Right, and so far it's just been an air war, and we're going to allow people over there to take care of the ground war, right? That's been the discussion so far.
Right, that's the discussion. There are some boots on the ground, but it's not the type of boots that we think when we send our men and women out there. They'll be in a very limited approach for right now.
Could you imagine a scenario, Congressman, because what I keep hearing people say is this is something that we're starting now, but it's likely to extend for quite a long time. This is not a short-term action.
Yeah.
So presuming it goes on for a while, could you imagine us back in a situation like Iraq and Afghanistan where we're deploying as many people as we deployed in those two efforts?
Well, I don't see it right now, but I never say never. You just never know what's going to happen. But at least I don't see it there. The American public is wary of war. A lot of money, lives that we've lost. And you can see other countries taking advantage of this situation. I think you see some of those countries in the Middle East, they're seeing that. You certainly see this in other parts of the world Russia knows, for example, in the Ukraine, don't want to change subjects, but they know that the American public is weary of war. So other countries have picked this up, that they know that the American public is weary. So before we go into a situation like that, it would have to change into a very different type of threat.
And the reality is we're also distracted. You know, we haven't talked about Ukraine or the Soviet Union or Russia for some time, right? And that whole part of the world. The fact is that other things could be going on in the world. We're now focused on this. In some ways, it destabilizes our ability to pay attention to the things elsewhere we need to be paying attention to.
When we as a country, when we have limited resources, our time becomes, our focus becomes very limited.
Yeah.
So we can't be the policeman, and that's been the big debate. You know, what's the role of the United States as a superpower? Are we supposed to play policemen in every part of the world? It makes it very difficult. And other countries, and certainly Russia, again, don't want to go into Ukraine, but you saw what happened in Crimea. You saw what happened in the eastern part of Ukraine. Yeah. And then ISIS came up, and I'm sure that North Korea is happy what's happened. I'm sure Iran is happy that other issues have come up.
Putin
that
is
have
only
taken
too
us
happy
away.
to have us not focused on them.
Yeah, I mean, it's, we got limited resources. We might be a superpower, but our resources and our focus is limited.
Let's turn our attention away from what is obviously an ongoing situation over there and turn to a non-controversial and easier topic to solve: immigration. You understand, Congressman, that this conversation plays out on several levels. What should the president do from an executive standpoint? Some people say nothing. All executive actions are bad. There's a timing question as it relates to that. President's made the decision to kick any executive actions he might take past the election. We can talk about the politics of that. And then there's a question about why you and your fellow members of Congress have been so unable to come to some agreement on what everybody seems to acknowledge is a problem that has to be solved, but just no one's able to solve it. So why don't we take the part that you all own first? Right. Why is Congress unable to get its arms around this issue, understanding that it's complicated, but also understanding everybody agrees we got to do something about it?
Right. First of all, you have to look at the dysfunctional part of Congress. It's not new. If you look at the history, there's been a dysfunctional Congress for many, 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 many years. If you look at the history itself, it might be a little bit more intense now than it was, but we've had this type of gridlock in Congress. It's very difficult because, people, you hear the American public tell members of Congress, senators, you got to be bipartisan, you got to work with the other side. And I'll give you my example. When I worked at the issue with John Cornyn, Senator Cornyn, all of a sudden people were saying, what are you doing working with that Republican? So people ask you to be bipartisan, but the moment you dare be bipartisan, you get criticized by members of your own party, not only by Democrats, but I've seen the Republicans do the same thing. So there's this very intense partisanship that it's amazing. There are times where you see leaders of both the House, I'm talking about the Democrats and Republicans, Boehner and Pelosi, and they might just walk across by them, almost, a few yards away. They won't even say hello to each other.
Don't even acknowledge one another.
Don't even acknowledge each other.
Right.
Things can be worked out if people would just talk to each other.
You think that dysfunction of this level, or at this level, has been in evidence in Congress for some time? This seems to be a new low. Where we are right now seems to be a new low. It's the least productive, by whatever measures this is taken, the least productive Congress ever. The famous do-nothing Congress of some time ago did more than this Congress. The approval ratings of members of Congress are down around, hardened criminals, right, out in the public. I mean, the fact is, you guys could not be, from the public's perspective, doing less or doing worse at it. So you think this is not a different scenario than normal? I mean, this is not...
Do you want to add up? I mean, you're doing pretty good.
Am I doing good? Good night, everybody.
Add a couple more negatives to that.
Well, but I mean, Congressman, sure.
No,
you can handle it, and you know it. Yeah, right.
No, but you're absolutely right. Yeah, look, the dysfunction of Congress has been there for a long time, but the intensity is just very different.
Right.
What makes it different is, in the old days, you would have one member philosophy or ideology or the interest of a district or a state it'd be one individual against another individual. Then parties started getting a little stronger, then you had parties. What makes it a little different now is you got third parties outside Congress that will come in. They'll come in and they'll send in their key votes and saying, if you vote this way, if you vote for immigration, it's amnesty, we want you, and you have third parties coming in.
Now, you
So
don't mean third political parties, but you mean essentially outside groups, right?
outside groups that come in
affecting.
that can now basically threaten, in my opinion, some of those members of Congress by saying, if you vote this way, we're going to come after you and we'll purify the right person in there.
You're going to get primaried.
You're going to get primaried, and that's what's happening. Is in the old days you would see the liberals, Democrats going after the conservative Democrats. You still get a little bit about on that. Now you have the Tea Party folks going after the moderate Republicans.
Right.
And I've seen some of my colleagues here in Texas. That's been amazing. They get some primary. They said, well, they think I'm too liberal. I said, my God, I hate to see, if they think you're too liberal, we're talking about Republicans, I hate to see the person running against you. So you get those third interest groups that are coming in that just make it very, very difficult. What's interesting in Congress, we have leaders, but there's not a lot of followers to those leaders. The old days, and I grew up here in Texas, the Bob Bullock, the Lloyd Bensons, the folks, the Pete Laney's of folks that, used to say there's a difference between this group and this group. Okay, we're going to put you in this room. We're going to close the door. Don't walk out till you work this out. Up there in Washington, people don't even sit down and talk to each other about how to work things out.
I know you've been gone from the Texas Capitol for a while. It's not much different now there.
The last time I was on the floor, they told me, Henry, it was February of the last session.
Yeah.
They said, Henry, you're not going to recognize the crazies that we have now here. I said, well, I think your crazies are probably our moderates up there in Washington, D.C. So they're getting there, but not there yet.
And to the point about leaders and not followers, I just read yesterday that there's another insurrection against Speaker Boehner, that the conservatives are disappointed with Speaker Boehner and that they intend, should the Republicans hold the House as is expected in November, that they're going to mount a challenge to the Speaker again. Speaker Boehner, pretty conservative guy.
He's very conservative, and I think he wants to do the right thing. He comes from that era that people can sit down and talk to each other.
Yeah.
If you recall, he was involved with the Leave No Child Behind, George Bush, and Congress back in 2001. So there's folks that want to do the right thing, but there's a small group. Right now there's 232 Republicans. There's 20 plus what I call very extreme folks on the Republican side that pretty much have a way of getting things done or stopping things from being done in the
They kind of
conference
dictate
itself.
progress or they stop things happening.
Without a doubt.
In their track. Now, Speaker Boehner, several months back, Speaker Boehner back home in Ohio made a comment about immigration, saying, we need to get this done, and the people who are whining about how hard it is need to stop whining. He ultimately said, well, I was kidding. People were offended by that.
Yeah.
But it illustrates the point. I think Speaker Boehner, temperamentally, you may agree with this, he probably would like to see something get done on immigration, if only to take it out of circulation as an issue, right? Yes. The fact is, there's not much chance that left to its own devices, this Congress is going to get something done on immigration.
That's correct.
You agree?
Correct. Yeah, it's unfortunate because, immigration is not going to go away. I mean, it's been here with us, and it has to be addressed.
Right.
But the problem with Congress is people are just afraid to take the tough decisions. They always use here comes the election, so we can't take a tough vote at this time. Let's wait for another time. And it's never the perfect time to address the tough issues.
Yeah.
The same thing with ISIS on Syria. People go up there, the president doesn't have the authority. He's using an authorization that dealt more with Al-Qaeda, the Taliban back in Iraq. He can't be doing that. Oh, but we're not going to take a vote on the authorization till later. So, people are just afraid to take the tough votes.
It's politics.
And I've always said, look, if you're going to be a member of Congress or any other elected officials, you're not sent up there to take the easy votes. You got to take the tough votes.
Yeah.
Then you got to talk to the public and tell them why you did certain things. But people are just afraid to take the tough votes, and that's what happened to immigration reform.
Yeah.
And even the president. I mean, if you remember the president on June 30th, he said two things. On June 30th, he said, since Congress is not going to do the immigration reform, and we should do it, but he said, Congress is not going to do it, so by the end of the summer, I'm going to go ahead and do it. Then he also sent a letter on that day saying that we have to change the 2008 human trafficking law. Remember this debate that we had about a month ago? He sent a letter asking us to change it. Then he changes his mind on the 2008 law, and then he changes his mind on doing the executive order right before the election. I would have guessed from a long time ago that this it was not going to happen before an election.
Hadn't exactly been a profile in courage any place along the continuum.
I definitely agree, and I always tell folks, if you're sent up there, you're sent up there not to be voting on a post office, name it a post office. You're sent up there to take the very tough votes.
Hard issues. Some people believe the problem with comprehensive immigration reform is the comprehensive part. That if you want to do an omnibus bill that touches all aspects of this, that's going to be a difficult thing to pass. What Speaker Boehner told me when he was in San Antonio several months ago, and others have said as well, is we got to break it up into pieces. We got to do the border and homeland security piece first. We deal with the guest worker program. We deal with this. We deal with this. We do it essentially in sequence, but it's got to be done in chunks. We can't take a bite of the entire thing all at once. What do you think about that?
Well, our Republican friends have been talking about doing border security for a long time. If you remember back in 2006, I think, the Senate passed a comprehensive immigration reform. The Republican-controlled House at that time, their response to that comprehensive immigration reform was to put 700 miles of fencing and make it a felony if you dig a tunnel under an international border.
This was when President Bush was in office.
That's right.
And he
Bush,
attempted to pass.
And let me tell you, Bush was good.
He was serious about it.
Bush was good. Bush really wanted to do immigration reform.
Right.
So, the thing is, are you going to keep moving the goalpost when you deal with border security? That's the one issue, number one. I would rather see comprehensive immigration reform. Can I see parts of it? Yes, I can do it. But the problem is that if you take the easy part on border security, that pretty much everybody can agree on border security as long as you don't talk about irrational things on things on the border, number one. Then you can get to a guest worker plan. That's a lot easier than the third part. But then when you get to the third part, people are not going to want to do the third part is what do you do about the 11 or 12 million
people who are
undocumented
here.
persons?
Right.
No amnesty like President Reagan and the Democrats did in 1986, but if you have a earned citizenship, or at least the proposal I gave to the Republicans, then why don't we do a legalization and let the process, whatever the law
Talk
is,
about what your proposal was on.
Yeah, the proposal is, as you know, there's 3 steps on how you deal with the 11, 12 million undocumented persons. Amnesty, no, we're not going to do that. Earned citizenship over a certain amount of years. They learn English, pay taxes, et cetera, and then they become citizens. Or my proposal was, why don't we do legalization? That way we take people out of the shadows. Don't put any bars. By bars is, when they're coming out, they become legalized, then whatever the law allows them to become citizens, then the law will allow them to do that, but don't put a bar.
So they get in the back of the line?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because part of the problem has been people who followed the law and have been waiting in line are being penalized if you suddenly allow these 12 million people to jump ahead of them.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I mean, theoretically, they'll be penalized. Nothing has happened. So, I mean, look, my father was born in Guerrero, Tamaulipas. He became a legal resident, then he became a naturalized citizen. So I understand how the process works. So, yes, whoever comes in comes at the end, and whoever's there, just like when you go to school lunch, you don't want to let somebody jump into you. I mean, that's a basic rule.
Don't cut the line.
So.
But again, you're for comprehensive, but so many of your colleagues on the Republican members, at least of the Congress, seem to be opposed to doing this all at once. We are looking potentially, certainly the Republicans will retain the House in November. We're looking at a very real possibility, better than 50% probably at this point, that Republicans will win the Senate. But in neither case will they have a veto-proof majority.
Correct.
President will be in office for 2 more years, but he won't be able to get the time of day in Congress. But if Congress passes anything that the president doesn't like and he vetoes it, they're powerless to do anything. Should we all just go on vacation for the next 2 years?
No. I'm one of those eternal optimists that I think we need to try, even if you're in the minority, you can get certain things done. A lot of it's going to depend on the communication between the president and the Congress. There's been some precedents, like President Clinton. There are times he could work very well with Republicans, and it just depends on that leader as how well can he reach out to the opposition party.
So if the dynamic is Speaker Boehner is probably the best deal the president's going to get. If the Republicans take back the Senate leader is going to be Mitch McConnell, who said right after the president got elected in 2008, job number 1 is to get this guy to be defeated, after 1 term. If I'm the president, I'm looking at these two guys and I'm going, oh my God, really? And frankly, they're looking at him and they're going, second half of a second term of a president with a Congress and the majority of the other party. I mean, it really is, nothing's going to get done.
Yeah, it's going to be
hard.
It's going to be a very difficult time. And again, I mean, if we just say let's give up and go home, nothing's going to be done. There can still be certain things will be done, but the big items, I think they're going to be very difficult because look, even the easy things that we should do in a very easy way, very bipartisan, the highway bill.
Yeah.
And Jesse, there's some folks here that we've dealt with, some of the folks on transportation. Those were the easy ways, easy things they couldn't be done that were bipartisan. The farm bill was a bipartisan bill that could be done, really not a lot of controversy. The Export-Import Bank.
Well, there was some controversy over the farm bill. There was a controversy over the food stamp provision included in the farm bill. And there were people who were calling for it to be decoupled, and then it would have been more easily passed.
I'm
right?
talking about the old days.
You're
When they
talking
were
about the old
bipartisan.
days.
Now
Right.
transportation has become controversial. The farm bill became very controversial.
Right.
The Export-Import Bank has become very controversial.
Indeed.
I mean, I'm giving you an example where bipartisan
Things
items
that used to be just
have
matter,
now
you know,
become so
well,
difficult.
the fact is the debt ceiling used to be a non-controversial vote.
So, you know,
right?
I mean, it's interesting. Whoever's the president, the other side is going to be against it. When Bush was there was a young senator who was saying you can't raise the debt ceiling. You can't do it. It's not the right thing. His name was Barack Obama.
Right.
And then he becomes the president. Now he's saying, oh, we can't default. Now the Republicans that used to support Bush,
all the people who voted all those times for the debt ceiling,
voted
right.
no. So it's if you look at the history, it's funny how politics comes into play.
Let me stay with immigration. I want to come back to one or two more federal issues in a second. I want to stay with immigration though, because obviously there's the federal component of it, and then there's what translates down to Texas. And you've served in the Texas legislature at a different time, admittedly, but you understand the dynamics and politics of the legislature. We have a lieutenant governor's race in particular where immigration is issue number one. Right. The Republican candidate favored in the polls, this is a Republican state, barring something unforeseen, Dan Patrick is going to be lieutenant governor, is for eliminating in-state tuition. He's absolutely for voter ID. He's for reinstating, or reintroducing, I should say, a sanctuary cities bill. He told me over the weekend he's not for Arizona-style show us your papers legislation, but everything I see in his campaign platform would suggest to me that he walks right up to the line of that. This is a different kind of conversation than what's happening at the national level. So if I'm somebody in Texas who cares about immigration and sees the emerging Hispanic majority, and this is what's coming up the highway, what should my reaction be? What's your reaction to that?
Well, you know, certainly, when you have a fast-growing Hispanic population like we see here in the state of Texas, the last census we had, Texas grew by 4.3 million individuals. 65% of them were Hispanics. You add the other minorities, African Americans, other minorities. Yeah. 90% of the growth we had the last 10 years were minorities, especially Hispanics. Yes. I mean, I think those folks have to be looking at what their leaders are saying, what their leaders are going to be doing, and certainly what their leaders have done. Yeah. I mean, I think it should bring pause to certain sectors of the state of Texas, without a doubt.
Well, not just what they're saying and when they're saying it, but also how they're saying it, because rhetoric in this campaign has also been an issue. You had the McAllen Chamber of Commerce CEO say the other day that rhetoric about the border and border security is actually costing the Valley business. People who are looking to bring jobs or bring business to the Valley are now saying, you know what, based on the rhetoric of this political campaign, I'm not sure that I want to come down to the Valley.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think you saw my discussion I had with two ex-generals, U.S. Military generals, where they got hired by my good friend Todd Staples to do a study of the border. Yeah. And without talking to a single witness at the border, they didn't talk to a sheriff, they didn't talk to a DPS, a border patrol, they didn't talk to anybody down on the border. Their conclusion was doing business on the border is like doing business in a war zone. That was their conclusion. So when we had them before our committee, I asked them a few questions, and they got a little excited because I kept asking them, did you talk to anybody on the border? Well, we did research. And I think the closest they got was to Austin, Texas. Right. And the reason I say that was...
I can assure you that ain't the border.
Well, that's not the border. They probably got paid their $84,000 at that place. But anyway, but what happened was that the reason I said was that at that time, Laredo murder rate was 3 murders per 100,000. the murder rate in Washington, D.C. was 15 murders per 100,000. So I asked the generals, I said, by the way, I had the chart up there. I said, by the way, would you 3 murders per 100,000, 15, would you call Washington, D.C., where we're at right now, a murder rate, a war zone? And they said, no, it's a little bit more complicated. And it's always a little bit more complicated, but the chamber was correct in the sense that when you start talking and bashing the border, I mean, even on the ISIS thing, what's the first thing they say? Where is it coming from? The border.
Well, I think they said that there were people crossing over from Juarez, is that right?
Juarez, El Paso itself on that. But anyway, the reason I say that...
But no evidence of that,
No
right?
evidence at all. No evidence at all. I mean, possibility, everything's a possibility. But keep in mind the terrorists of 9/11 they came in through legal methods. The student visas on that. But anyway, going to that, he is right because, we were trying to get some doctors to the Laredo VA, and it was very hard to get them. You know why? Because they didn't want to go down to the border. You'll love this one. A military unit here in San Antonio that was going to go down to Laredo, and they stayed at the La Posada. I think everybody's familiar with La Posada. Right. They canceled temporarily their contract to stay over there because they thought it was too dangerous. And my thing is, I got on the phone, I called them up, I said, well, first of all, you're the military. Second of all, Laredo's safer than many other places than where you're at right now. And it was just amazing. So it's even 150 miles down here, people still have a little perception. So yeah, I mean, it's right. It affects trying to get professors down to the universities, trying to get doctors to the hospitals, trying to get other folks down there, business people, because they see what they hear. And it's a myth, but again, it's a bastion of the border. It's so easy to attack the border.
Aren't most members of Congress kind of like those generals? You got a lot of people in Congress.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody's got one vote, but many of them pronouncing wisdom on the border haven't been in the border.
Or the ones that...
Can't you arrange for all of Congress to come down onto the border, maybe?
Or the ones that are more interested are the ones that said, I know the border, Henry. I was down there, and I spent a couple hours one day, so I know the border. So it's the ones that haven't shown up or spent a couple hours, and they think they know the border more than people that actually live there, drink the water, breathe the air down there.
You ought to get a special session of Congress down to the border.
Definitely.
Have them meet in Laredo, right?
Definitely.
Well, they can go to La Posada since you've pronounced it safe, right?
And listen, and when we did healthcare, it was very controversial.
Right.
And I told folks, wait till we get to immigration reform. It's going to be really exciting, and we're seeing it right now.
Well, as if I asked you to tee up healthcare, you've just teed up healthcare. So let's talk about that.
Yes.
So 5.7 million people in the state of Texas, according to the census numbers that came out last week, have no health insurance. That doesn't count to underinsured. Right. And that's a slight improvement over the numbers that we had previously, right? Still the largest percentage of our citizens without health insurance and the largest raw number of citizens. Again, we like to be first in everything in the state of Texas. I'm not sure this is what we mean by wanting to be first, but there it is. We know what we don't like. We're told all the time we don't like the Affordable Care Act, didn't want to create a state exchange, don't want Washington with its boot heel on our necks. The reality is the costs of not having health insurance at that level in the state of Texas trickle down to property taxes. They trickle down to charity care. They trickle down to affect economic development, workforce.
Absolutely.
So my question to you is, what are we going to do about this in a state like Texas where the Republican leadership, conservative folks, elections have consequences, I get that. There's no interest in being in a kind of mood to compromise with Washington. We have at least 2 more years of a Democratic president. Maybe they're hoping that somebody from the Republican Party gets elected in 2016 and we defund and repeal. But up until that point, are we just going to have nothing? What's your perspective on this?
Well, listen, I voted for healthcare reform. It was the right thing to do. It was the right thing to do. Now we have a piece of legislation that has to be modified and changed. What we're seeing in Washington are 2 extremes. On one side, you got the Republicans that want to repeal the health care. And remember, the first argument was it's unconstitutional. And then when the most conservative Supreme Court that we've had for a long time says it's constitutional, they move over to repeal. It's not going to be repealed. Then on the other side, you got Democrats that don't want to change one single word. And that's wrong. Because anybody who's familiar with the legislative process, when you pass a piece of legislation, you implement it, and then you make modifications. So there are changes that we need to do to the health care without a doubt.
Right.
But we got the two extremes, the repeal and don't change one single word. So hopefully, I always say this after an election, hopefully after this election, people will sit down and say, let's work something out.
But you're not really
And,
optimistic. I mean, you may be an optimist.
I
You're
am,
not that
I
much
am
of an optimist,
I'm
right?
very optimistic, but I'm not going to bet any money on it.
Yeah. So what happens in the interim? So if we don't do anything, if the position of the state leadership here is we're not going to compromise, we're not going to negotiate, we want the great fabled cartoon bag of money to drop onto our steps and let us have the money with no strings. If that's the position of the state, and the federal government's position is we're not going to negotiate with Texas that way. We've got a law in place that's the law of all 50 states. Texas is, at least as of the moment, still one of the 50 states, right? If that's the position, where's their common ground on that? What are we going to do?
Well, I mean, that I can only speak, where I'm at. A lot of it depends on, this. If you're going to have negotiations or talks, you're going to have two parties that talk to each other.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that the leadership here in Texas would be willing to be creative on how we can work this out. Because it's very unfair for all those people that don't have coverage at all.
Yeah.
Because when they get sick, they're going to end up somewhere.
Yeah.
They're going to end up somewhere, whether it's an emergency room or somewhere else. They're going to end up somewhere, and we want to have healthy kids so they can go to school. We want healthy people so they can go to work. And it's unfortunate, but it's just the thing. We got leaders, but they're not leading. What is that? I think somebody said, when a leader walks and there's no followers, he's just taking a walk in the park.
Yeah. We're about to overturn state government. Mulch of state government is being turned over in this next election. New governor, lieutenant governor, new commissioners at all the offices. Still conservative folks. You hold out any hope that the new group will have a different perspective on this than the old group?
I hope they do. I really hope they do.
Do you have any relationship with Dan Patrick and Greg Abbott? Should they be the two who win?
Dan Patrick, no. Greg Abbott, yes. And then some of the other folks that there'll be, I assume, might be coming in.
Yeah.
But the thing is that Texas has changed. Back when I was in the state legislature, I was just talking to Albert about this. When we were chairing the appropriations for higher ed, 75% of all the new dollars in Texas would go, when we had the money, would go into public and higher education. The focus is not on the things that I think will build Texas in the long run. Higher ed, we haven't seen a tuition revenue bond for a long time.
Right.
I was the author of House Bill 713, the Texas grant. At least Rick Perry has been very protective of that. I hope Greg Abbott is also protective. I hope Speaker Strauss and other folks are protective of allowing the accessibility for students to go to college.
But the TRB thing, was a flashpoint in the last session, didn't get passed. The fact is many campuses are seeing extraordinary growth thanks to the growth of the population in Texas. We theoretically want more access to higher ed. We want more people going, but we don't have facilities to house them.
You can do certain things online, but online is not the answer.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to build those construction. When I was there in the old days talking about UTSA, we did a good job at the tuition revenue bonds.
Right.
UTSA, this campus here, we were just talking about it. Most universities would get about 3%. Yep. With the exception of two universities in the 90s. That was UTSA, this campus, and Texas A&M in Laredo that got 10% because we put the focus where we needed the growth and where we saw the growth. And I hope that the state leadership puts a focus on education. The old days, that's where we put the focus on education. I am for economic development. Yes, we are great at creating jobs, but at the same time, we have a fast-growing population. You just can't forget about education.
Yeah. I bring up the question of could you work with, Abbott or Patrick or, your relationship with those guys. You alluded earlier to the fact that, you attempt to be bipartisan. There are not a lot of people who do. When you work with Republicans, Democrats hiss at you. Politico called you recently the Republicans' favorite Democrat, right? You were criticized, as you said, by your fellow Democrats for daring to try to work with John Cornyn. You were appointed Secretary of State not by a Democratic governor, but by a Republican governor. Does this make you a pariah in your party generally to be associated with Republicans? Because honestly, as you observed earlier, we say we want bipartisanship, but the minute that somebody steps out, then the Democrats call you out for doing so, but then the Republicans go, well, we're not really sure we trust him. So I want you to talk about that, because you've always walked that line. It's been a long time.
Yeah, and I will continue doing that because I think it's a right thing to do.
Why don't you switch parties?
Because I'm a Democrat and I will die as a Democrat.
Tell me that, but I want to, but drill down for me. Tell me positions on which you think Democratic core principles or your core principles unshakable. Tell me things where you think.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're asking now, what's the difference between a Democrat? What's the difference between a Republican?
Yeah.
The bottom line is.
Because you say you'll die a Democrat.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Hopefully not soon, but anyway.
Right.
So, but listen, the thing is that if a person, an elected official, puts party before their country or their state, it's wrong. And I think in Austin we're seeing that, and we're certainly seeing that in Washington, where party comes first. And if you're not loyal to the party, then there's something wrong with you. The easy thing for me would also go along with the Democrat Party.
Yeah.
But I don't think that would serve my state, and that would not serve my district itself. And therefore, I will continue doing what I think I've been doing, which is the right thing to do, is reach out, and try to get things done, because that's the right way to do it. Even in the old days, LBJ said, I'm a Texan, I'm an American, then I'm a Democrat. And that's what we need to do, is you can't put party before. Now, what's interesting is that sometimes, and I'll say this, sometimes even parties, members of my own party, the ones that, yell the loudest are not the ones that actually do the more for the party. If you look at it, I'll say this, I'm the first Democrat that pays my dues, as you know, Democrats and Republicans have to pay that. I'm always the first one. I pay more than any other Democrat congressional member in the state of Texas. I've done that for the last couple of years. So, I mean, those are things I don't go around and say, I give more money
but
than anybody.
But it indicates that you support your party.
I support my party.
Right.
But if you are going to have a litmus test that, how many out of 100 votes you support your party and that makes you a good member of Congress, I think that's the wrong litmus test. The thing is, what's good for America and what's good for Texas, that should be the litmus test.
Rather than party. Well, we're going to go to questions here in a second from the audience. We have a microphone in the center. We'll ask you to line up and ask questions there.
All the easy questions first.
All the easy, just like I gave you all the easy questions first. Right. Do you endorse candidates of both parties?
No.
You only endorse Democrats?
I did it once.
One time?
Well, I didn't endorse him. I went out and supported President Bush.
President Bush.
Right.
So will you endorse, or have you endorsed Wendy Davis for governor this year?
I support every Democrat up and down.
So if Wendy Davis or Leticia Van de Putte want to come down to Laredo and campaign with you?
Love to have them there.
You have no problem with
that? Talk to Leticia. Actually, she took one of my employees to work for her, so she's a good friend. Leticia's a good friend of mine.
Does the abortion issue in the case of the governor's race, which has been controversial along the border and in the valley, present a problem for you going back to Laredo? You know, Senator Davis lost 26 counties in the primary to an underfunded, no-name, Democratic, pro-life, Catholic, Latino candidate.
Right.
And there's some question, the Republicans will say, that in the Latino community, which the Democrats absolutely must have and overperform in relative to most governor's races, for them to be competitive, that the abortion issue, which Wendy Davis, through the filibuster, is associated with, that's actually a double edge for her in places like Laredo. What do you think?
Well, I mean, certainly, the vote that the filibuster she had, we had just had a vote, I think, a couple of weeks before. And I voted opposite to her. I'm pro-life.
Yes.
But again, if she wants to be pro-choice, that's up to her. For Hispanics, I think that's an issue that they certainly look at.
Yeah.
That would be one factor they will look at.
But as a pro-life Democrat, you are comfortable campaigning with Wendy Davis. You support her.
Well, I support. One thing I've learned is for the Democrat Party, I go back to the Lloyd Bensons, the Bob Bullocks, the Bill Hobby. In those days, we said the Democrat Party is a big tent. Now you have Democrats that want to purify. If you're not a liberal Democrat, you're not a Democrat. And then you got Tea Party folks that want to purify the Republicans. Right. If they're not Tea Party, they're not a real Republican. And you got too much purification. I'm, again, old school, and I believe in the big tent.
I'm interested, though, you didn't have a Democratic opponent, and you don't have a Republican opponent.
Right.
What are you doing right? I mean, but you acknowledge these days
no,
that's unusual.
No, that's a very
right?
serious question. Let me give you a serious answer. I told them I was a friend of Evan Smith, and they said, okay, we give up. We're on your side.
Yeah, I'm hugely popular in Laredo.
No, look, you never know. You never know.
No, I don't.
Are you streaming this live? I want to Laredo folks. Evan Smith. No. Look, I don't know. I mean, when I first started, my opponents were Democrats because they quote, "You're Hispanic and you have to be a Hispanic liberal Democrat." That was it. And myself more as a moderate conservative Democrat, I didn't fit their profile. We got those 2 elections out of the way. They left me alone. Republicans have been third-tier Republicans running against me, and this is fine. This time I didn't get a Democrat or Republican. And again, I think it goes back to what I said. If you represent your state and your country and your district, people will understand that. If they feel that you're up there representing your political party, like some people, like a lot of people, not some, like a lot of people do in Washington and Austin, then people are going to take notice on that. And I'd rather represent my state and my country than a party. We'll always say as a Democrat, but parties should come third and not first.
I think that's a great place to stop our portion of this. Let's now take questions. If anybody wants to get up and ask the congressman a question.
All the easy questions.
Come on now. What do you got? Here's one.
By the way, I'll take the easy questions. Evan will take the hard questions.
Ma'am.
Hi, my name is Anna Katie. I'm with the group Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. And I have a question about background checks of firearms. Currently, we have a background check system where only guns sold through federally licensed dealers go through a background check. That means about 40% of guns are sold through private hands. And, excuse me, should have had some water. And this causes a big problem. In states where they have not waited for the federal government to pass a background check bill that makes sure that all guns go through a background check bill, those states have fewer women who are killed by their domestic partners, 38%. 39% fewer cops are killed. And there are also 51% fewer suicides.
So tell me your question.
I'm sorry.
That's
Okay,
okay,
so the question is, last year there was a background check bill that came through the House. You did not sign on as a co-sponsor like Joaquin Castro and Lloyd Doggett. And I'm wondering if you will support it when it comes up next.
And could you address this larger issue? Because the polling among the public, at least at the time that bill came up, was for greater background checks.
No. And certainly, I mean, I certainly want to look at the background checks. I mean, full disclosure, I got an A rating with the NRA just to make sure there's a full disclosure on that. But I do have to say that on background checks, it's something that we need to talk about. But keep in mind, we get thousands of bills are filed, and by not signing on to a piece of legislation doesn't mean I'm for or against it. I just don't go and sign on to everything. But am I willing to have that debate and talk about how we can sensibly address that issue along with other issues? I mean, some of the violence we've had out there dealing with guns have to deal more with mental illnesses and other issues like that. So there's other issues that we need to look at. But again, there are thousands of bills that I have not signed on.
That's Congressman, now I want to go a little further on this. That's a three-pronged issue. It comes up again and again. There's the ban on assault weapons, there's the ban on high-capacity magazines, and then there's the background check issue. On any of those, do you feel like you could conceivably see yourself voting for a ban, or for background checks? You think it's a possibility?
Everything's a possibility.
So you would not take it off the table?
Not totally.
Not totally. Okay. Sir.
Thank you very much. My name is John Donahue. I'm pastor of a small church in Karnes County, Karnes City, which also has the a large detention center where some 500 mothers and children are being detained. And it's also a for-profit center. That is to say, it's run by
for-profit detention center.
That's right. It's the GEO Corporation. Many of us in the churches are very concerned about our tax dollars being used to pay for-profit prisons for immigrants. And we are also concerned, too, that in the process of receiving donations, you receive $14,000 from the GEO Corporation. And I was wondering if you'd be willing to return that in the interest of not being perceived as being in favor of such use of tax dollars.
You feel there's a problem there?
No. First of all, no, I'm not going to return it, number one. Number two, does that mean that I have to return money back to the teacher groups, to the police groups, to other, I even get money from media groups also. Does that mean that that affects my
Although
way of
not
thinking?
us.
Well, not y'all, but there are
you pointed at
media groups that I've received money from. Sorry, not
no,
the
it's okay.
Tribune. That's another one.
Yeah.
So the answer is no. Again, I'm going to look at the issues and decide what it is that I'm going to be voting on. But if you think that anybody that comes in across and you feel that there's no role for the private sector is involved in so many things. Not only in security, not only in defense, the private contractors. They're involved. I'm a big believer that the private sector plays a role working with the federal government, so the answer is no. Now, going in, if you feel that we ought to, Pastor, if you think we ought to let everybody come in and have an open border, then that's where you and I have a very disagreement.
Well, you put words in my mouth which are not
I'm sorry,
accurate.
I didn't hear what you said. What?
Well, I don't hold for an open border, but what I'm suggesting is that people that do arrive here should be treated humanely and allowed access to judges, and then, if they
Right.
if they have a credible fear of return, then they be allowed to stay, or at least before.
Right.
Are you
Okay.
comfortable with the conditions in detention centers?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I mean, if there's a problem, there's different, I mean, the ICE, the Homeland is the one that provides the supervision. They are there to do their job, number one. Number two, certainly everybody has to be provided with the respect and dignity, and if there's a problem, that's where the legal profession comes in. Then there are lawsuits, and I've seen lawsuits at some of the detention centers itself. So one, you got the government oversight. Two, you got the legal system that provides that. And again, Pastor, with all due respect, if you feel that people should come in and just be catch and release, then we have a disagreement because, you mentioned credible fear. I think I know what you're going at. The law says that if it's credible fear or asylum or a victim of a sex trafficking, then a judge will make that decision. And that's what I was asking for the border, is when the American public was seeing chaos down there, they wanted order. And part of that order is that you detain people with respect and dignity, and then you have a hearing and a judge makes that decision whether that person comes in. But if your feeling is that the private sector is bad, then we have a very big disagreement because the private sector plays a role. Doesn't mean they're right 100% of the time, but there are mechanisms there to punish the ones that don't follow the rules or the laws.
Thank you for your response.
Thank you so much.
Sir.
And by the way, talking about other centers, Pastor, there's another one coming up in Dilley, Texas.
Sir.
Congressman, my name is Robert McKinley here with UTSA. Follow on relative to Mexico, and you were very well recognized as a thought leader and having the connections with Mexico. The relationship's been dominated by insecurity and immigration, but it's much broader than that. Could you expound on how we can work on preventions versus cures like fences?
Yes.
And also the other dynamic is as hotspots come up across the world in Middle East, Russia, et cetera, the Mexico agenda just kind of goes up on hold.
Right.
And does not progress. Can you comment on those dynamics for us, please?
The Rio Grande, Rio Bravo, as the Mexicans call it, should be seen as a place that unites us and not divides us. That mentality has to be taken away from a lot of folks that see the border as a problem area. Mexico is a very important partner. Every day there's $1.3 billion of trade between the U.S. and Mexico. There are 6 million American jobs here because of the trade and the commerce that we have with Mexico. You see the impact here. Laredo, my hometown. Laredo is now the third largest port in the whole country. LA, New York, and then Laredo, and we see a lot of the benefits. 18-wheelers come through here.
Right.
Up to Austin and on all that. So trade is important. With the Eagle Ford up there, we've seen the area transform. I got a lot of the Eagle Ford in my area. What's going to happen in the Borges Basin, which is across, that should be very good for Mexico. Do we as a country pay a lot of attention to Latin America and Mexico? No, we don't. We as a country, everything we export, 40% of everything we export goes to Latin America. Now, do we pay attention 40%? I don't think we do. And let me just say this. Even our own administration, you're not going to believe this, but I want you to look at my website to believe this. When Secretary Kerry was before the Appropriations Committee, and I got to ask him questions, there were 2 different times, and I want you to look at this. One, I asked him, why are we not paying more attention to Mexico? Why are we not putting more resources? Look what's happening in Tamaulipas, et cetera, et cetera. You know what his answer was? They got Carlos Slim. And I'm like, what does the richest man, have to do with funding the federal government? Yeah. It was amazing that the Secretary of the United States made that comment. Then another time I asked him about why he was cutting 49% of the funding and proposing the administration. This was April of this year, March or April of this year. We were cutting 49% of the funding for Mexico and money to Central America.
Yep.
Just a few months before this come in. We, working with the Republicans, I told K. Ranger, we all have our own interests in Mexico and Central America. South America is an interest of mine. I told her, we can't let this happen. We cannot let this happen. And guess what we did? We stopped the administration from cutting 49% of the funding to Mexico itself.
How is our relationship, Congressman, right now with Mexico? I saw last week that the president of Mexico wasn't particularly happy about the National Guard being on the border. He and Governor Perry are kind of in a little bit of a
discussion.
Discussion is the nice way to say it. What's your sense of our relationship with Mexico right now?
Well, the thing is, I know the president, Peña Nieto, and I'll say this because I don't know what I'm supposed to disclose, but let me just say generally Mexico. Let me just say this. Mexico doesn't think that the U.S. pays enough attention to them. And when we pay attention to them, it's in the wrong area. Everything is drugs, fences, on the fence.
Violence.
Peña Nieto probably could be the first president that will go to one of our walls, face the USA and say, Mr. President, tear down this wall, like Ronald Reagan did to, back in Berlin. Yeah. I mean, I can see this because they just don't see us paying attention. In fact, I'll disclose this. The first meeting between the presidents, the U.S. and Mexico president, Peña Nieto had said, I'll put this money into NatBank and we can work on the border and work more on the border if Mr. President, Mr. President Barack Obama, will match what we do here. Guess what? That was never relayed to us. And the Mexicans feel that proposal by the Mexicans was never acted by the Americans on that.
Right.
So, I mean, that tells you that the attention of the U.S. is not there. And what we do, all we do is cut their funding. And it was amazing, just a few months before this, unaccompanied kids, we were talking about cutting 49% of the funding. Now, there are 5 countries that are part of the $6 billion club, or the $1 billion club. Israel, Jordan, Afghanistan, Egypt, and Pakistan. Iraq used to be part of it. Mexico is not even close to that. Before we did Plan Merida, we were giving Mexico $36 million a year.
So is your sense that we ought to be regarding Mexico as more of an immediate priority?
Oh, without a doubt.
Yeah.
I mean, look, we got a 2,000-mile border with them, and if you listen to the rhetoric of people, all the problems are down there in the border, so why do we not pay more attention to Mexico? And by the way, if they're doing $1.3 billion of trade between the U.S. And Mexico every day, and there's 6 million American jobs, that tells you something. And one last figure. When a product comes in from China, it will have about 4% American products. When something comes in from Canada, it will have about 25% American products. But when something comes in from Mexico, 40% American. So that tells you how much we're connected with them at this time.
We have time for one more? Okay, last question right here, ma'am.
I apologize. I don't know if I missed something, but I didn't hear you give a yes or no answer on whether or not you support comprehensive background checks. Do you have an answer for that?
Yeah, I did give you an answer. It depends on the language. I, as an attorney, I always look at the language.
Okay, so the Manchin-Toomey bill, do you support the Manchin-Toomey bill that was in Congress in 2013?
When a bill gets before the floor and it's the actual language, I will make that decision.
So no answer.
The answer is...
I think he just gave you an answer.
I just gave you an
Yeah,
answer.
thank you, good.
I didn't give you the answer you wanted, but I gave you an answer.
Congressman, we appreciate the opportunity to have time with you. Great to talk about so many topics and many more we could talk about, but I know everybody here appreciates it, and I certainly do as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Congressman Henry
Thank you
Cuellar,
so much.
thank you.
Thanks.
Right. Congressman, thank you.